Nasir al-Sharif, second in command to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi during the famous 2008 raid in Afghanistan. White had also lost an arm while doing this, his pitching arm, as it turned out, when America learned that Bobby White, in the tradition of Pat Tillman, had after 9/11 walked away from a Division I baseball scholarship at Ole Miss to enlist in the Army and fight al-Qaeda. Better still, the killer of Abu Nasir turned out to be the son of Big Ed White, the Hall of Fame left-hander for the Astros in the 1980s. It was a story an old baseball fanatic like Tio couldn't resist. As Bobby's biography took shape on social media, mainstream America began to learn what the conservative radio audience already knew: that saving a brief dip when he condemned Trump on January 6th, Bobby White had virtually owned the center in conservative morning radio. Media experts believed it was only his refusal to deny the 2020 election results or condemn all abortions that had kept him from taking the #1 spot. White's record as a special ops soldier had always been public, but the Abu Nasir revelation changed everything. His audience had rocketed from 8 million to nearly 12 million in the interval since, which put him within spitting distance of Sean Hannity. By the time the GOP donor class learned that he had a law degree from Vanderbilt and had authored 2 respected nonfiction books on the South and the Lost Cause, they were talking Bobby White up as a national candidate. But it was TikTok that had truly sparked his meteoric rise, to the point that odds makers in Vegas were now giving 3-1 that the kid would announce a third-party presidential run by next week. What made this anything but juvenile fantasy was the army of young foot soldiers who had been relentlessly gathering names to register the war hero by petition on the presidential ballot in every state in the Union. Rumor had it that the nascent White campaign had already gathered nearly enough signatures to put their candidate on every ballot in the country in January 2024. What drove those kids, Tio didn't know. Bobby White was Hollywood handsome, anyone could see that. But beyond this, all Tio had seen were stunt videos, in which White used jaw-dropping special operations skills to execute extreme physical feats, while calmly dissecting issues like book banning or the lunacy of arming teachers in grade schools. Tio didn't really get it. But then, he was too old to live by the pulses of his cell phone. He would see Bobby White in the flesh soon enough. Tio was a little taken aback by the modest studio that hosted White's radio show, but he'd seen gifted men shake the souls of millions from tiny cubicles before, and the idea that one of the most consequential campaigns of the 21st century might go airborne from a small corner of Mississippi was no less likely than it had been in 1980, when Ronald Reagan gave the dog whistle of all time from the Neshoba County Fair. Tio had been there on the day, on that goddamn harness racing track, 40 feet from the candidate, sweating like a pig, though he'd been 50 pounds lighter. And who the hell was Reagan then? A former governor, an out-of-work actor. Wiping his face on his jacket sleeve, Tio walked into the Magnolia Star studio and surveyed the 2 men who stood waiting in the small reception area. The candidate made an impression up close. 6 feet 2 inches tall, Robert E. Lee White possessed a craggy handsomeness to which no photograph did justice, and his photos were good. This kid was what Tio's staff kids called an American archetype. To a modern audience, the retired Master Sergeant probably landed somewhere between Matthew McConaughey and George Clooney. But his masculinity quotient was off the charts, with the gravitas of an earlier era, suggesting a young Gregory Peck or even Clark Gable. But Bobby White was no actor. He was the man those actors were hired to play. It wasn't hard to see why he'd taken off on the damn TikTok or whatever it was. Tio stuck out his pudgy hand. His left because Sergeant White was missing his right arm from the shoulder down, and he wore no prosthetic. Despite his weight and age, Tio still had considerable strength, but in the grip of the